My parents always labeled my 12-year-old as the slow one, while constantly praising her cousin. During their anniversary dinner, they proudly revealed that the cousin would receive everything: the house and the $280,000 family trust. I didn't break down or argue. I calmly stood up, smiled, and said something about my daughter that instantly changed the mood. They handed everything to him and didn't even look at my daughter. I didn't gasp or cry. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed, the way I learned after 65 years of swallowing moments like this. If you've ever stayed quiet while being underestimated, or watched someone you love be dismissed, this story is for you. Don't blink. Stay with me. Somewhere in my purse, papers pressed against my hip, warm from my body. I had brought them for a reason. I just hadn't planned on needing them so soon. It was Saturday evening, just past 7, in my parents' dining room. The same room with the ticking wall clock and the long scratch on the oak table that never got fixed. Pot roast sat cooling, gravy skinning over. My daughter's feet didn't reach the floor from her chair. When my father raised his glass, the light caught his ring, and I knew before he spoke that something was wrong. To family, he said, smiling toward my nephew. And to making sensible decisions. He announced the house and the trust as if reading a grocery list. Names, amounts, certainty. Applause from the wrong corners of the table. My daughter's name was never mentioned. I nodded once, slowly. I even smiled, because that's what women like me have learned to do when rooms turn cold. My mother avoided my eyes. My brother cleared his throat too loudly. The cousin's mother squeezed his shoulder, already counting rooms. No one noticed my daughter's fingers knotting the hem of her sweater. A waiter's bell from the kitchen chimed by accident, sharp and out of place. The clock ticked. Someone laughed too late. I felt my pulse in my ears, steady and calm, the kind of calm that comes right before you decide not to back down anymore. I reached for my water. The glass shook just a little. I set it down and placed my palm on my daughter's back. She leaned into me without asking why. That trust landed heavy and right. My father kept talking, about responsibility, about potential. Words that sounded reasonable until you listened closely. He said my daughter was sweet and creative, the way people do when they mean incapable. My mother nodded, lips thin, eyes fixed on the gravy boat like it could save her. I thought about the phone calls I'd answered alone. The teachers who spoke over me. The tests I paid for myself. The afternoons in waiting rooms with old magazines and newer truths. I thought about the quiet way information changes things if you're patient enough to collect it. The air smelled like onions and furniture polish. My knee ached the way it does when storms are coming. I shifted in my chair and felt the edge of the envelope again. Not yet, I told myself. Let them finish. Of course, my brother said, chuckling. This just makes sense. He didn't look at me either. He never had, not when it mattered. My daughter finally looked up. Grandpa? She asked, soft. The room froze. My father smiled at her without answering, then went back to his speech. That was when something settled in me, firm as bone. I stood. The chair legs scraped. Every sound grew loud. The clock, the clink of silverware, a car passing outside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said my father's name once clearly and waited until he met my eyes. There's something we need to talk about, I said. His smile faltered. My mother's hand tightened around her napkin. I felt the weight in my purse pull downward, patient. I stayed standing, facing them, and let the silence do its work. I could feel the room choosing sides in small ways. A cousin shifted her chair back. Someone reached for bread and stopped. My nephew stared at his plate, suddenly interested in nothing. I remembered my first job, my last promotion, the way people mistake quiet for empty. I adjusted my blouse, felt my heart slow again, and waited. The clock kept time. Outside, a dog barked once. I held my daughter's gaze steady and saw relief flicker there, fragile but real. I took one breath, then another, and said his name again, softer this time as the truth pressed forward, ready to be heard. No one moved. Everyone listened. My father didn't answer right away, and that hesitation told me more than his speech ever could. My father looked at my brother, then at my mother, as if someone might rescue him from finishing this moment. I stayed standing, hands relaxed at my sides, letting them fill the space with their own confidence. I had learned long ago that people reveal the most when they think they are winning. The clock kept ticking behind him, loud now, and I waited, steady, while the room leaned toward arrogance. No one interrupted, and the silence felt heavier with every breath I took. My brother finally spoke, his voice smooth and rehearsed, explaining why logic mattered more than feelings. He talked about numbers, stability, and fairness, as if repeating those words could make them true. I watched his hands instead of his face, how they fidgeted with his napkin whenever my daughter shifted in her chair. My mother nodded too quickly, afraid to lose control of the evening. I said nothing because every sentence they offered gave me another opening. Their certainty rang hollow, and I could almost hear cracks forming beneath it. I waited, calm, letting them keep digging without realizing why. The cousin's mother leaned back, smiling wide, already living in a future she assumed was guaranteed. She asked practical questions about repairs and timelines, too comfortable for someone borrowing certainty. My daughter pressed closer to me, her shoulder warm against my arm, and I felt a sharp pull in my chest. I wanted to speak for her, defend her, but restraint mattered now. Arrogance thrives when unchallenged, and I let it bloom fully in that room. I studied each face carefully, storing expressions like evidence for later use. None of them noticed me doing it. That detail mattered. More soon. My father cleared his throat and tried to regain authority, reminding everyone how hard he had worked for what he owned. His words carried pride but also fear, the kind that slips out when control feels threatened. I recognized it immediately. I had seen it in boardrooms, in offices, in men who underestimated quiet women. I shifted my weight, steadying myself, and noticed my knee had stopped aching. That calm told me I was ready. I glanced at my purse, then back at him, keeping my voice locked away. For now, silence still served me. They mistook it for weakness. Someone poured more wine, the bottle clinking against glass, and conversation tried to restart around me. My brother laughed too loudly, eager to smooth things over, while my mother busied herself with plates. I felt strangely detached, as if watching from above, noticing details others missed. The trust they placed in assumptions amazed me. They believed history favored them. I knew better, and that knowledge sat quiet and solid inside me. It wasn't pride. It was preparation, earned slowly and paid for dearly. I let them keep talking, revealing more than they intended. Every word sharpened my resolve. Further still. My daughter whispered my name, barely audible, and I squeezed her hand to reassure her. She didn't need explanations yet, only certainty that she wasn't alone. I leaned down and told her everything was fine, meeting her eyes until she believed me. Around us, the family drifted into careless chatter, confident the moment had passed. They didn't see how closely I listened. Carelessness is loud. Preparation stays quiet. I memorized tones, pauses, and glances, building a picture piece by piece. Nothing they said would be forgotten after tonight. I promised myself that silently. The moment was ripening. I waited. Patiently. My father finally turned back to me, irritation creeping into his voice as he asked if I had something to add. The room leaned in again, expecting compliance or emotion. I felt the envelope press harder against my side, as if reminding me of its presence. I straightened, smoothing my blouse, and met his gaze without flinching. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply said his name once more and watched confidence flicker. Something shifted in the room, subtle but irreversible, and everyone sensed it. They waited for what I would say next. I let the silence stretch. Longer. I let the silence stretch a moment longer, then spoke before anyone else could fill it. I told them what they had always laughed at was the very thing I had been working on for years. My voice surprised even me, steady and low, carrying across the table without effort. I saw confusion ripple through their faces, and I knew I had their attention at last. Not anger. Not pleading. Just facts, delivered calmly, the way life teaches you to do after decades of being dismissed. I reminded them how they joked when I enrolled in night classes in my 50s. How they called it a hobby, something to keep me busy now that my best years were supposedly behind me. My brother shifted in his chair when I said that. My mother stared at the table. I explained that while they were busy labeling my daughter, I was learning, studying, and building something solid brick by brick. No one interrupted. They couldn't. The room felt different now, tighter, like air before a storm. I told them about the evaluations they never asked to see, the ones that showed my daughter learned differently, not poorly. I didn't share details, only enough to unsettle their certainty. My father frowned, his fingers tapping the table, a habit I recognized from childhood when things didn't go his way. I watched that small movement closely. It told me he was starting to worry. Not about us, but about himself. That distinction mattered more than anything he could say out loud. My daughter squeezed my hand again, and I felt the warmth of her palm anchor me. I thought about the afternoons spent driving her to appointments, the way she watched the world quietly, absorbing things others missed. They called it slow. I knew better. I spoke about patience, about resilience, about how some strengths don't announce themselves early. I kept my tone even, careful not to sound defensive. This wasn't a plea. It was a statement of truth they could no longer ignore. The cousin's mother tried to laugh it off, suggesting I was being dramatic. Her voice faltered halfway through the sentence. I met her eyes and didn't blink. The laughter died quickly. I realized then how unused they all were to being challenged without emotion. It unsettled them more than shouting ever could. My brother opened his mouth, then closed it again. That silence answered a question I hadn't known I was asking. I reached into my purse but stopped short of pulling anything out. The motion alone drew every eye to me. I could feel my heart beating, slow and deliberate, and I welcomed it. I spoke instead about the work I had done quietly, about choosing consistency over recognition. I mentioned mentors, late nights, sacrifices made without applause. Nothing specific. Just enough to suggest a foundation they hadn't bothered to notice forming beneath their feet. My father asked what I was implying, irritation creeping into his voice. I smiled gently, the way you do when explaining something simple to someone who insists it's complicated. I said I wasn't implying anything at all. I was clarifying. The difference seemed to confuse him. The clock ticked loudly again, and I noticed how no one reached for their food anymore. I thought about my age, about how often women like me are expected to fade quietly into the background. I stood there, gray-haired and steady, and felt gratitude for every slight that had taught me patience. What they mocked in my daughter had sharpened me. It had given me focus. I didn't say that part out loud. I didn't need to. They were beginning to understand it on their own. I looked from face to face, seeing doubt where confidence had lived minutes before. I told them I hadn't come to argue. I had come to correct the record. My voice softened when I said my daughter's name. I stopped speaking and let the quiet return, thick and expectant, knowing I had only shown them the surface of what I had built. I held my ground, feeling their certainty crumble, and understood this moment was the beginning of something irreversible for us all. I stayed where I was, feeling their certainty weaken, and decided it was time to explain the one thing they had never bothered to confirm. My father asked again what I meant, sharper now, and I answered by talking about the house. Not memories or sentiment, but paperwork, signatures and dates. The practical things he always respected. I watched his confidence falter as soon as I said the year I first got involved. That detail landed harder than accusation ever could. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. My mother's hand went to her chest, then dropped. I explained how ownership is rarely as simple as people assume, especially when pride replaces attention. I didn't accuse them of wrongdoing. I didn't need to. I simply described steps taken, notices sent, and agreements revised. My brother frowned, trying to remember conversations he had ignored. The cousin's mother stopped smiling altogether. I spoke about responsibility using my father's favorite word. About how I protected my interests when no one else bothered to ask why. I reminded him of the months he was traveling, the letters he waved away, the meetings he sent others to handle. His jaw tightened. He remembered now. That was clear. Regret flickered across his face, quick and unwelcome. My daughter watched quietly, absorbing the tension without fear. I felt proud of her composure. I told them how I had stepped in not out of greed but necessity. How I had made decisions to keep stability for my child when the future felt uncertain. I avoided details, choosing instead to outline consequences. The house, I explained, could not be promised so casually. Not anymore. My mother tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She looked smaller, somehow older. I felt no triumph in that, only resolve. This wasn't revenge yet. It was correction. I reached into my purse again, slowly this time, and placed a thin folder on the table without opening it. The sound it made was soft, but everyone heard it. Questions followed, overlapping and anxious. I answered selectively, calmly, refusing to be rushed. I explained boundaries. I clarified misunderstandings. I watched them realize the ground beneath them had shifted. My father stared at the folder like it might disappear if he ignored it long enough. It didn't. I noticed small reactions I would have missed years ago, the way my brother's foot tapped faster, the way my mother avoided looking at anyone. Age teaches you to read rooms quietly. I thought about how often women like me are expected to soften truths for comfort. I refused. I described how oversight works, how silence can be consent, how responsibility passes to whoever shows up consistently. Each sentence tightened the air. I wasn't lecturing. I was explaining consequences in language they understood. Practical. Unemotional. I felt my shoulders loosen as I spoke, as if years of restraint were finally justified by clarity. My father shifted again and asked questions that circled rather than landed. I answered only what was necessary. I could see calculation behind his eyes, measuring loss, weighing pride against reality. That was new. I had waited decades to see it. My hands stopped shaking. I felt present in my body in a way I hadn't for years. Whatever happened next would happen on my terms. I glanced at my daughter, then back at the table, understanding that patience had brought me here, and patience would carry me through the next part. The silence grew uncomfortable. Someone cleared a throat. Plates were pushed aside without appetite. I felt the room finally tilt toward uncertainty, and I knew they were beginning to understand that assumptions fail when ignored long enough. That realization unsettled them more than any raised voice ever could. The smell of cold food hung in the air. No one ate. Outside, headlights passed, indifferent to our reckoning. I felt tired but steady. Years of preparation have a way of holding you upright when emotions threaten to overwhelm. I wasn't finished, but I had said enough for now. The truth had been placed between us, solid and undeniable. They finally understood the house was never theirs to give away, and that understanding arrived far too late. My father stared at the folder on the table as if it had betrayed him. My mother's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her all at once. No one spoke. The silence wasn't dramatic anymore. It was hollow. I felt it settle, and with it came a calm I hadn't expected, clean, steady, final. "I'm leaving now," I said gently. Not as a threat. Not for permission. My brother looked up sharply as if he wanted to argue, then stopped himself. He knew better now. The cousin's mother wouldn't meet my eyes. I reached for my daughter's coat, helping her into it the way I had when she was small. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to understand what was happening. My father stood. "You can't just walk out like this," he said, voice tight. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had mistaken control for permanence. "I can," I replied. "And I am." He opened his mouth again, then closed it. There was nothing left he could say that would matter. The truth had already done its work. At the door, my mother finally spoke my name. I turned. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else there too. Recognition, maybe even regret. I waited, but she didn't apologize. She didn't need to. This wasn't about that anymore. We stepped outside into the cool night air. The porch light buzzed faintly, the same sound it had made for decades. I pulled my daughter close and felt her relax against me, the tension leaving her body in a slow exhale. That alone was worth everything. In the car, she asked quietly, "Are we okay?" I started the engine and smiled. "We're better than okay." I told her then what I hadn't said inside. Not every detail, just the truth she needed. That the paperwork was done. That the trust they talked about no longer held power over us. That the house, the money, the decisions, all of it had been secured long ago, piece by piece, in ways no one thought to question because no one thought I was capable of it. She listened without interrupting, her face serious. When I finished, she nodded once. "I knew you had a plan," she said. That nearly broke me. We drove home in silence, streetlights passing rhythmically, my hands steady on the wheel. I thought about the years I had spent doubting myself, shrinking to fit rooms that never made space for me. I thought about how anger had tempted me and how patience had served me better. Revenge, I realized, wasn't loud. It was precise. Later that night, after she was asleep, I sat alone at my kitchen table. I opened the folder at last, reviewing what I already knew by heart. Accounts protected. Ownership confirmed. Future secured. I felt no rush of triumph, no urge to call anyone back and explain further. Closure didn't require witnesses. My phone buzzed once. A message from my father, unfinished and unsent like so many things between us. I didn't open it. I turned the phone face down. In the quiet, I allowed myself to feel everything at once. The grief, the relief, the pride. I hadn't just defended my daughter. I had reclaimed myself. The woman they dismissed, the one they underestimated, had been paying attention all along. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen. I made coffee and listened to my daughter hum softly as she got ready for school. The sound was light, unburdened. I stood there, cup warm in my hands, and understood that what I had taken back was never just property or money. It was voice. Choice. Leggy. I left that house with my daughter, and in doing so, I carried away everything that had ever truly belonged to us. If this story moved you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories where quiet strength finally gets its voice, and justice finds its way home.